Hello and welcome to episode 2 of a DM's Guide to Icewind Dale, Rime the Frostmaiden. As this might be the first time you've seen me, nice to meet you guys. On this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the town of Bremen, we're going to look at all the quests that lead out of this town, and I'm going to give it a bit more detail. What to do before the dragon attack, what to do afterwards, and at the end of the episode, I'm going to go over your questions on Reddit and YouTube. If you've got any questions after watching this episode, feel free to put in the comment section below and I'll answer them in next week's episode. Hope you guys enjoy, and remember, if you do like the content, remember to like and subscribe. If you're feeling generous, there's a Patreon link in the description below. So let's jump right into it then. Let's discuss one of my favourite 10 towns to begin with, which is Bremen. So to give you a quick synopsis of Bremen, Bremen is a very small town. The town's very friendly, there's not much comfort and there's hardly any services. It has a population of 150 people, which if you have lived in small communities you know that's very, very small. It's got a militia of 25 soldiers and it's got 2 veterans. So the information we get given about Bremen in the book is a relatively short paragraph, which I'll show you just now. Bremen, founded by dwarf prospectors, the sleepy town of Bremen sits on the west bank of Mare at the mouth of the Shingarn River. Bremen's harbour has frozen, requiring local fishers to haul their boats across the ice to put them in the lake. Visitors who lack a boat can reach Bremen only by crossing the river, which is mostly frozen over. Targos, Tarlomain and Lonelywood are all visible from the docks on clear days. If Orl's everlasting winter has one benefit, is that the hardy folk of Bremen are spared the seasonal floods that normally threaten the town in the early summer. That's not to say that the long nights, frigid air and howling blizzard provide any comfort. They don't. Twice in the past 2 months, residents of Bremen have had to mount search parties for their town speaker, oldest living resident, Doublgroth Skalskar, and twice they found him wandering the frozen shores of Shingarn in heavy furs with no memory of how he got there. Doublgroth, old even by dwarf standards, isn't long for this world. Many locals fear the same is true for the town itself, if Orl's brutal winter does not abate. So as Bremen, you have the town speaker, Doublgroth, and you have Cormelfun, the owner of the buried treasures. These are the 2 most important NPCs in Bremen. Another thing to mention with the 10 towns is that every 10 town makes a sacrifice of some kind to Orl the Frostmaiden, and these sacrifices varies from town to town. So the sacrifice in Bremen is the sacrifice of warmth, because it's such a small town. So towns such as Bremen that can't bring themselves to give up their people or their food have to forsake their warmth for a night. No fires are lit between dusk and dawn, and this forces the locals to share body heat for warmth. And anyone who dares to light a fire is savagely beaten. What I'm going to look at in today's episode is A, how to make Bremen memorable, how to give Bremen life so your player characters have a connection to it and they care about it. Because after the initial part of the campaign, Sunblight's Fortress is going to release a dragon, and most likely Bremen is going to be destroyed unless your player characters are very, very fast and they come to defend it. So you need to give your player characters a reason to defend Bremen and to care about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what Bremen is before the attack and what I'll do with Bremen after the dragon attack. With Bremen, you have 2 quest lines that originate from it. So you have Cormelfun, her quest regarding her son, which will take you to Cairndinaval. And this quest links with Doublgroth, and we also have the quest that resides in Bremen, and that is a lake monster. What I'm going to do first, I'm going to explain Cormelfun's quest. So Cormelfun is the owner of the Buried Treasures Inn, and this inn caters to treasure seekers, especially ones who pan for treasure along the riverbank in warmer weather. And due to this, and because of this perpetual winter, this establishment has few, if any, visitors. Even though Cor doesn't make much money, she treats her guests like royalty. In this episode, not only am I going to explain Bremen, I'm going to explain to you guys how I run a tavern encounter, because taverns are probably the most common way you'll start a D&D campaign. And it also works really well with Adventure Hook Cold-Blooded Killer. So I'm going to show you what I will do to introduce this into your campaign. One thing to watch out though for starting in Bremen is there is no blacksmith, there's not many big shops, which means that if your characters want to buy lots of things, get prepped for their adventure in Icewind Dale, they're going to go to Brandsander. So it's really well understanding Brandsander and Bremen, just in case your player characters decide they want to leave Bremen right after your introduction. Cora is eager to please and apologises at the slightest provocation if she thinks the characters are not pleased with her service. So to make sure that your players are experiencing the living world and not just a video game that never changes. What you can do is, as you explain the scene in the tavern, you can explain that the tables are dirty, glasses are quite smeared, and if your player characters comment on any of these, Cora is going to introduce her quest. She'll explain briefly that her adult son and only child, Harwar, used to help with chores until 2 months ago. At this point, your player characters might follow this hook. She'll discuss with your player characters that her son had joined a search party to find the speaker after he went missing during a blizzard. The speaker was brought back safe and sound, but Harwar got separated from the others and didn't find his way home until the following morning. He had frostbite and he could barely walk. So your player characters will find out that the cold, the winter, not only affects them, it affects the people, and it makes them care more about the story. But again, you might be worried here because your player characters might not care about this. You play it by ear and it depends on your party, but I'll continue. To then explain that over the next few days, Harwar displayed a meanness towards his mother that was uncharacteristic. The change in his demeanour started after Cora found what looked like a shard of black ice in her son's room. Harwar snatched it away and threatened his mother with bodily harm if she touched it again. So this black ice is charlatan. Charlatan is black crystal that has the consistency of iron, but it has an amazing property where it can hold an arcane charge. This means that this material is perfect for making large magical constructs. It's scattered through the entirety of Icewind Dale. This item has corrupted Cora's son, and this item is also the same material that is used to create the Charlatan Dragon. This is your first clue in the session 1 potentially, where you can explain the terror of this black ice and subtly put in certain clues. So when this dragon descends upon Icewind Dale, your characters have some context for it. So not only are the Duergar wanting this charlatan to create various constructs to destroy Icewind Dale, there's more than one enemy in this frozen tundra. She'll then explain the next day 2 tieflings, a male and female, arrived at the end and offered Harwar sanctuary in their castle. He left with them willingly, taking the shard with him and telling his mother that he would never return. The tieflings wore amulets that looked much like the shard in Harwar's possession, this charlatan which I told you before. Cora misses her son terribly and she hopes that he's still alive. She also remembers that one of the tieflings mentioned a castle, and she knows that there's only 2 castles in 10 towns, an intact one in Caer-Dineval and a ruined one in Caer-Cornic. So this sends your player characters to 2 different locations. Caer-Dineval is where they'll meet with Harwar and they'll find a cult called Devil Worshippers, which we'll deal with at the end of the campaign when you search for the city deep underneath the ice. However, your player characters will go to Caer-Cornic, they'll interact with one of the Duergar, searching for Charlatan, and that will take you down the linear path towards Sunblight's fortress and deal with the first part of the campaign. And I'll deal with how to run Caer-Dineval and Caer-Cornic in a different episode. We have Cora Melfin, the tavern owner. So how would I run a tavern in D&D? So with Icewind Dale, you have 10 towns, which means that each town has a typical tavern, except from Dugan's Hole because it's far too small. So instead of making 10 separate taverns, so you have to make 10 different battle maps, and realistically your player characters are not going to have too many fights in these taverns, but they can. So what I'll do is I'll make 1 tavern map and do each of these taverns as theatre of the mind. And if fighting was to take place, I'd have this map just in case. And this runs in how I would start my campaign in Icewind Dale. So we're in the tavern, we are in the Buried Treasures, we have Cora Melfin behind the bar, we have your party of adventurers here, we have Harper, Angle and Carrick, and we have Helen Trollbane, and she'll be giving the quest for Cold-Blooded Killer. And behind, you'll see these fishermen will link your player characters to the quest in Bremen known as the Lake Monster, which I think is a fantastic opening quest for Icewind Dale. So what you're doing here is you're giving your player characters 3 options. So when you start a campaign, you'll have the introductory quest, which I'll do in a moment. We also want to make sure that your player characters don't get sidetracked too much. So for instance, what's going to happen is you'll hear the opening of the quest, you'll talk with Helen, you'll then have Cora to chat to, and she'll give you more context for her son, which will open up quests further down the bank. You guys will also have these fishermen, and because this bar is so quiet, you don't need any other NPCs. So regardless of who your player characters talk to, you know the situation and how to deal with it. The only thing you can't account for is if your player characters say, hey, I don't want to deal in this tavern, I'm just going to go somewhere else. And I'll show you how to back that up after we finish off with Cold-Hearted Killer. So starting the quest of Cold-Hearted Killer, it's going to take place in your tavern, which we have Helen Trollbane. She's a retired bounty hunter who's been stalking a serial killer ever since she's found the connection between 3 murders at a small trading company called Torx.
You can do this quest in any of the 10 towns. I've just used Bremen as an example. However, if you do start a campaign in Dugan's Hole, there's no tavern. So this opening doesn't really work, but you can probably make something up. As you go to the next town, get into a tavern, and you can start it from there. So how do you introduce this quest to your player characters? So you can start off by reading this box text, and this is where you're going to bring in a bit more murder mystery vibe into the campaign. Just another gruesome day in 10 towns. Howling wind, bitter cold, foul tempers, and snowdrifts big enough to bury a herd of moose. But today the local tavern is abuzz with news about a series of recent killings. Before the murders, the only question in everyone's mind was, will Summer ever return to Icewind Dale? Now the question is, will I be the killer's next victim? Nothing breeds fear and paranoia like a murder with no face. 3 cold-blooded murders have been committed in the past month. A halfling trapper in East Haven, a human shipbuilder in Targos, and 3 days ago, a dwarf glassblower in Bransander. Each victim found with a dagger of ice through the heart. What's the connection? The drunken lot huddled in the tavern offer no credible ideas, but setting apart from them is an elderly shield dwarf with a nasty scar across her nose, who looks like she has something worth knowing. She's been smoking her pipe, eyeing you ever since you walked in. So in this tavern you have many different NPCs. So we have, of course, as I said before, we have Helen and we have these fishermen. This is when we have to figure out how we roleplay these characters. As in each of these characters are unique, they have their own bonds, they have their own flaws. So we need to figure out as a DM, are you going to voice act or are you simply going to narrate everything these characters do? One of the things that I do is, because I'm not the best voice actor, is I give all the NPCs certain mannerisms. With the buried treasures, it's incredibly small. So it's ideal for starting off your campaign, getting used to it, and perhaps you might be playing with new players. It gives you a bit more of freedom to express yourself. As in, if you have a massive tavern, such as the Yawning Portal in Waterdeep, where there's 50 or 60 patrons running around and many things happening, it can be very difficult to DM. If you do have large numbers, what you can do is you can give a vibe to a group of people. So instead of narrating every single person, we can discuss this table as a whole. We have these 3 fishermen, and what I'll do is personalise the fishermen in general. These fishermen most likely are lazy, because the reason they're there is because they're skipping fishing, which your player characters will figure out. They walk outside and they meet the head fisher, which will lead into the quest of Lake Munster. These men are lazy, they probably don't want to be here, they might be grumpy, they might be hunched over, they might have had too much to drink. And as you think about role-playing these characters, you can think of these flaws, what they will do in certain situations. You have Helen, who's an old shield dwarf. She's smoking a pipe, which might indicate that she might speak slowly, have a lot of experience, which means that she won't be too hasty to act. We have Cora Melfrun, the owner of the bar. For my example with Cora, I would see her as being very, very stressed. Very nervous because she's never seen so many patrons in the bar in the last 6 months. There's 3 player characters, there's 3 fishermen, there's a dwarf, and there's only one of her. And this act of being nervous, the whole place is dirty, builds more to her character. If I was to voice act Cora, I would slow down my speech, give her more of the vibe of being a noble or perhaps being upper class. If I was to roleplay Helen, I would make the voice very deep, very gruff because she's smoking a pipe. And if I was dealing with a voice for these fishermen, I'll definitely just speak my noble accent. So let's continue on with Cold-Blooded Killer then. So your player characters might initiate this chat with Helen, but if they don't, she will come to their table and introduce herself. She might ask different questions such as, let's say there's an elf, there's a halfling. She might try to figure out how they got here in the first place, what they do for a living, and would they be suitable to take out Septic. Once she's found this information, and she believes your player characters are heroes, she'll give them this information. Septic Kraltro works for a small travelling merchant company called Torrance, owned and operated by a shady dwarf named Torga Icewind. In other words, Septic gets around. He's charming, makes friends easily, he's also Torga's bodyguard, so I'm guessing he's good with a blade. So with that opening paragraph, you know, A, Septic's not going to be by himself, he's going to be in a group, and this allows your player character to think, should we get Septic by himself? You want to perhaps capture one person, don't want to deal with the whole caravan. So you discuss he's charming, which means he's most likely charismatic, and he's good with the blade, which means he was probably good at close combat. His victims come from only 3 towns that sacrifice people to the Frostmaiden on nights of the new moon. This is what passes for civilized behaviour in Icewind Dale. Maybe the victims found a way to keep their names out of the drawings, and Septic found out they were cheating. So he killed them, maybe, just maybe. Septic is doing the Frostmaiden's work. So then now this introduces the whole premise that people are being sacrificed to the Frostmaiden, and this deity might not be the kindest deity in the world, but also perhaps might foreshadow that Septic might have supernatural powers. I followed Torgs for a 10-day as it moved from town to town, quite the devious little enterprise. That's not my concern. What struck me is how comfortable Septic Castle looked in this weather. No coat, no scarf, no gloves. It was like the cold couldn't touch him. Kiss of the Frostmaiden indeed. If any of your player characters have the Midwinter Child secret when they start the campaign, this should be ringing alarm bells for them. And this will indicate that most likely Septic is resistant or immune to cold damage. I will pay you 100 gold pieces to apprehend Septic Caltro, discern his guilt, and deal with him, preferably without involving the authorities. When the job is done, return to me to collect your money. And this final paragraph indicates that your players will get paid, which give them initiative to go and do this quest. Don't deal with the police, and the most important thing is to return to me. Which means your player characters, if you start in Bremen, will have to come back to Bremen to get their money. You could also use Helen as a guide of sorts, and your player characters can ask her various questions about Icewind Dale. So they can ask, for instance, where to get supplies, how to get from A to B, and the dangers on the tundra. So with this quest, this is designed to get you out into another one of the 10 towns. The way I would run this would be that if they go to a larger town such as East Haven, Targhost, or Bransander, they could bribe a barman or a certain political figure in the town to find out where Torgs will be next. And this will allow you to give enough time for your player characters to level up to perhaps level 3, and they can deal with Septic. As in, I've had characters attack Septic at level 1, and it's been very close to a TPK. So with this opening, you're introducing this quest, but realistically your player characters won't be dealing with it in their first session. They may be dealing with this 2 or 3 sessions down the line. And because of this, I'll finish off Cold-Blooded Killer in a later episode. What we're going to deal now is how we're going to introduce the quest Lake Munster. So the way I introduce this quest is that your player characters are at the bar, and most likely they're going to talk to these fishermen. These fishermen perhaps give clues towards Helen, where she's been, she's a veteran, and also if your characters are very charismatic and they start a conversation, they realise that these 3 fishermen have been skiving. They have not turned up for work, which means their head of fishery outside is going to be very upset and might get anyone to grab fish from the sea. Your player characters can follow this hook, and they can talk with these fishermen, and they'll find out that there's a sea monster that has been attacking people, has been catching fish, this knucklehead trout, incredibly difficult, and it's causing a lot of the townspeople to go hungry. If your player characters ignore this quest and they come back to Bremen to pick up their money from Helen, they'll notice that the town has now changed, because since they've not dealt with the sea monster, people are now much more hungry. As in, if you really wanted to, you could even remove core or other notable NPCs from the town, as in they might have to simply starve to death because your player characters didn't do anything. Let me know in the comment section below if you guys had any good ideas for this. So if your player characters don't care about this quest and they walk outside, I run this short scenario. As your player characters leave the Bower Treasures Inn, as they walk out to go on an adventure of their own, not too sure where to go or what to see, as soon as they leave the Bower Treasures, if they've got high enough perception, they'll notice an old man walking by the riverbank. If they get closer and if they know the history of the town, they recognise this as Doublgroth, the town speaker. The way I play Doublgroth is that he's very old and senile, and most likely has dementia. So if your player characters pay attention, they'll notice that Doublgroth is slowly taking off his clothes as he's preparing to swim in this river. If your player characters ignore this, he's going to go for a swim and you'll never see him again. If they try to apprehend him and stop him from jumping in this river, they'll realise that he has no idea how he got there, who the player characters are. His personality will switch. So he'll either be very smart, intelligent, or he won't be there, he'll be very lost. Because I find with these 10 towns, I try to symbolise the town with the speaker. It's much easier to roleplay one character that symbolises the whole town than to roleplay various characters in these towns. And they always remember the senile old man, Doublgroth, when they have to fight this dragon as it's running towards Bremen to cook the whole town. So I'd run that short encounter, just give Bremen more flavour. If you guys got any other short encounters you can do within Bremen, let me know. I'll see you next with some questions.
So the first question today, we're going to go over a question on Reddit by Hey Chadwick. And he says, this is good. I'd appreciate some advice on which adventures to do first, as I'm a bit torn. I get into level 2 easy, but which ones are the least dangerous next? So with me personally, these opening quests can be very easy or very hard depending on how your party do them. So for instance, if you're caught in this cave, if your party goes into that cave and fights the frost giant, they're probably going to die. However, they go in and they run away, it makes a really good chase sequence. And you can bring back this short mission later on in your campaign. And I'll give them enough XP milestone for surviving that encounter. They can get from level 2 to level 3. With Sea Monster and Bremen, this is comfortable for first level or second level. It just depends if they attack the Sea Monster or can make friends with them. It can be very easy, very hard. The ones I would definitely avoid would be Cairn Cornig, because there's so many Duergar in the fortress, unless your player characters are able to stealth. The main thing with this is that it's all about your party. Are your party all about talking about things, or are they all about killing things? And if you want more detail on this, let me know in the comment section below. And for the second question, we're going to look at Alex's comment on YouTube. Did you use extra maps during the campaign? I saw all the maps in the module, and especially for endgame and secondary quest, there are only a few. Appreciate the guide, looking forward to the next episode. So one thing about Icewind Dale is that the book gives you the bare battle maps. You need to make a lot of battle maps if you want to do this near the end game. It can get quite confusing. I'll show you the maps I've made and give you a short description of how to make them. Worst comes to worst, just get a battle map that is 250 feet long, 200 feet high, and just make it bare snow. And you can use this battle map over and over again. You can also use this on Roll20, for instance, to remember how many mounts your characters have. Have they got axe beaks? Have they got dog sleds? And for instance, have they got griffins later on? So I would make a bare snow battle map. And if you are dealing with one of the quests near the end, where you have the 4 trials with Oral the Frostmaiden, you just need to use that same trade map 4 times in a row. But to answer your question in a concise manner, you need to make a lot of battle maps. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, if you do enjoy this content, remember to like and subscribe, and there's a Patreon link in the description below. And just before I forget, what I'm adding on Patreon now is a Discord server where you can chat to me and chat to other players and DMs of Rime the Frostmaiden. If you're interested, that's our Patreon benefit this week. And guys, I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao!